Hey, everybody, welcome to Locker Room. Guess what, folks? The much anticipated return of Scott Hatfield.
Yeah, what number is this?
I have no idea.
Number 8.
Totally lie. Is
this
it 8?
The Kobe Bryant edition, man.
Oh, R.I.P.
Yeah,
Kobe,
absolutely.
rest in peace. I didn't realize we were number 8 of season whatever we're in. You know.
Yeah, 95.
So this is our Southland men's podcast, trying to redeem men's conversations, talk about the right things in the right ways. That's what we do. Sometimes we don't hit that goal. We'll see what we do today.
We're gonna take it. We're gonna swing at it.
Yeah. So this season we've been trying to talk about hot topics, which I don't know that this one today necessarily is hot in the sense that it's in the news, but it's definitely something that's prevalent in the life of everybody, but definitely for men. One of the challenges for us as men, especially when we assume the role of provider, protector, breadwinner, and then there's this calling thing that you and I have on top of that in specific vocational ministry that we've both walked through our entire adult lives. And you and I have been some different places. You've been more places than I have, but we've been kind of to the west and back again.
Yep.
And I want to talk today about how do you know when it's time to move on? How do you know when it's time to leave one thing and move on to the next thing? And so maybe just to start us, you and I both went to Cincinnati Bible College. They had a seminary. There is no Bible college anymore. Then it became Cincinnati Christian University. Now it's nothing.
Now it's nothing.
Now it's a parking lot.
Now we just have a high school
paved
graduation.
paradise and
validation.
parking lot. So, but you went there a few years before I did. You came from Louisville, came to faith in Christ in high school, and then ended up in Cincinnati Bible College. So maybe pick up there. Where'd you go after you graduated and got done?
My sophomore year, I left U of L, went to my sophomore year at Cincinnati, and then basically the summer came where.
Just real quick, I mean, you were a track athlete at U of L.
Yep.
We were talking before we started recording. You were a high jumper, long jumper, and you did some relay stuff. What was the inseam approximately of your shorts? Like 4 inches, maybe less.
Maybe.
Were they real baggy and thin and flowy?
John Stockton said those are some short shorts.
Okay, John Stockton even thought. Okay, all right,
yeah, they were tight.
All right, so sorry, I derailed this already.
So I get there my sophomore year, and I know that there's going to be internship stuff that's going to happen, but I don't really have. I don't really have any connections. I mean, I just came to Christ when I was a 17-year-old junior, and so I've been at this church for a year. Went to college for a year at U of L, and then basically I had a call from a connection from my home church that there was a guy in there's a church in Irvine, Kentucky, Estill County, River Drive Christian Church, that was looking for basically a youth minister intern. And so for me, I went down there, met him, and I was just there for a year, and it was phenomenal. God in his provision put a godly man named Randy Beard around me, and I don't know that I learned anything about student ministry from him, but I learned about just what's a pastor look like, what does a man of God look like, and not that I've always God's always put me around those type of men, but that was he reeks with integrity. He was willing to invest in me. He taught me things like how to do a hospital call. You were
saying the other day, like he went fishing for a weekend or something. It was like, hey man, if anybody dies, anybody dies, you're doing the funeral.
Yeah, you're doing the funeral. Here's three different folders of funerals.
Yeah,
you're going to do it. And I'd never prayed so hard in my life that
nobody died.
Yeah,
that's right.
But he wanted to empower me. Taught me how to baptize somebody. I'd never done that before. So I roll into there on a Friday night from Bible college. And he's like, hey, you got a baptism this weekend. Let's go get in the water. And, I'm just showing me how to do that. So I got to watch him and his family. I got to watch he and his wife. I lived with them for part of my internship. And then at the end of that internship, which was basically the end of the semester, he said, hey, I feel like God's got bigger things for you. And so it's like we're breaking up. And he's like, it's not you, it's me. It's like
kicking you out of the nest.
Like, really?
Fly, little bird.
And so I was really kind of baffled by that. Because this is all new. I mean, my brain is just going, I just want to serve you. I just want to make a difference. I think student ministry is going to be that. I enjoyed that season. Had one high school student when I got there, and there was like 18 when afterwards, and some cool, just beginning to learn and understand. But it wasn't long after that this is Northeast now calling, the Christian Church in Louisville. And so I got a call from Bob Cherry, who's, Bob is, he's started this church, been there a long time, and says, hey, we want to talk to you about middle school ministry and wondered if you'd meet us at Kingfish. And that's all he said. So I get down there, and it's he and another guy named Ron Cassins and Bart Stone. And so he says, hey, this isn't an interview, because he is skeptical about me. I'm brand new at this, and I would be skeptical of me too. And so he starts down the road, asking me questions, learning my story, and man, after that, in the middle of it, he goes, hey, this is now an interview. And I'm like, oh.
Do I need to change shirts?
Yeah. All right, step up the game then, And so I guess I went from a conversation to an interview, so I earned that. And then afterwards, he said, hey, we want to talk about this, and we'll get back to you. And said, hey, we want you to come. So I came and did middle school as an intern for a year, my junior year and my senior year.
Mm-hmm. Did you go down every weekend and do that
every weekend?
Well?
Yeah. Yep, summer stuff, all, the whole time. Live with a family there, even though my family was just probably 25 minutes south of that. I'm engaged, trying to figure out what's next, and there's a real sense that they're going to hire me full time, and then the guy that's doing high school is going to step out into adult ministries there. And so before I graduated, they said, hey, we want you to come. We want you to be full time in middle school and high school. So I did that for 7 years.
Yeah, so let's kind of press in there a little bit, you know, and for those, who aren't pastors, they're not in the church world or whatever that looks like, you being at a good-sized church in Louisville, a real opportunity to make a difference, real dynamic youth ministry. I mean, I was several years behind you, but knew of you and what you were doing over there, and you're kind of in some ways in the shadow of Southeast Christian Church, this huge church out in Louisville, that kind of thing, but your youth ministry was really thriving and doing well. You're married at that point. And then back here in Lexington, there's this guy named Brewster McLeod who had been here since the late 70s. Yep. I came up under his, youth ministry, that kind of thing. And he was starting to hit the end of his run after 20-something years of youth ministry time here. And so, start some rumblings of like, hey, Brewster's gonna hang it up and move on to something different. Who's he gonna look to, and so you get that phone call, but you've been at a thriving church, growing youth ministry. Louisville's where you're from, is your home, and so you walk us through that moment, because a lot of men have been there where you get a phone call or you get an email or something that says, hey, we'd like to talk to you about this, and that can turn your whole world upside down.
Here you know this very well, Nicole, is that when we start serving, we just work hard. We put our heads down. We try to make the next right decision. We stay courageous. We push people to follow Jesus, trust Him. We add the right people around us, people that have strengths and our weaknesses. We develop leaders who develop people, and then things grow. And so this thing went from 30 high school students to almost 300. Yeah. We had a church of 500 when I first got there, and it was a church of 1,500. So about 18 to 20% of the people that attended our church were students. Right. And it was awesome. Yeah. I mean, just one story after another of life change. We were, it was crazy.
And you're newly married, no kids, so you're just going hard.
Going hard. And so what happens in that is that churches begin to hear things. And again, I wouldn't have known how, that stuff gets out, but you start learning that stuff, and then churches call. And so, and Randy Beard, back in that year that I spent with him, it's funny, he said, listen, here's what I want you to know is that longevity is the key to ministry fruit. And so there will be churches that call you, and to be honest with you, keep your head down and quit looking over the fence and know that there's fruit from longevity. It is where you invest. It's not on the other side. It's this grass that you're going to go after is the stuff that you're going to cultivate. And so, but if God wants to raise your head, He will. And so there were probably 10 to 15 churches in different places in the country that were interested, and I just kept saying no. I love the team that I was around. I love what what God was doing in our church, and we just continue to see story after story after story. And so, and then Brewster calls. And in fact, I think I'd spoken at a CIY where Southland students had gone. Yeah. And Brewster had said to somebody, I think that's the guy. And so Brewster being Brewster, he calls me, and we had done like maybe some CIY planning meetings and stuff like that where I'd been around him and stuff. And so but I respect him and I respect Southland. Not knowing a ton about the Christian church all over the place just because of me being so new in it. But I did know enough about Southland with Wayne and Brewster, and he'd been in Cincinnati. And Bro came here, and just learning more about the changes and the growth that was ushering itself in. And so, like, he called me, and we met in Frankfurt the first time. I felt like I was having an affair.
Yeah, that's the stopping point between Louisville and Lexington.
Yeah, so we're like Applebee's, and he's
Waffle
talking
House,
to me. Yeah, and so he came to Louisville one time, and it was like, oh,
hey man, get out of here.
Yeah, this is like, should I put a costume on? What's the deal? And so, my wife, who's not excited about change at all, really wrestled through this, and so. And in fact, it's weird because Southland was twice the size and it had about a quarter of the students that we had at the time. I think Brewster just done so many other things, and he didn't mean to neglect it, but it just happened. Yeah. And so, and Sarah's like, why would we do that? And I'm like, well, maybe we should do that. Maybe that's part of why God, and maybe it's a stewardship thing. Sometimes calling is about stewardship. And to be honest with you, we'll probably talk about this later, but sometimes it's just about obedience. It's not about up and to the right. It's not about greater numbers. It's sometimes just going, I've asked you to do it.
Right.
And so, but in here, and Bro called, Bro called, we were kind of wrestling through. And
what year was that?
99 is when we came.
Yeah.
But Bro's very compelling. And I had a deep respect for him. He'd done enough CIYs with us to go, man, that dude is a great dude. And I don't know him, but love his heart for the city, love his heart for the church, love his heart for the student ministry. He talked about just the vision, the renovation that needed to take place. And so I was like.
And he was an old student ministry guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so after 7 years of being at Northeast, we felt like it was a clear calling to take that step and move to come here.
Yeah.
So
you come here in 99 and you hit the ground. You got to follow, a guy who's really known, loved, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Make some changes, honor him in that process. That's always a challenge, and anybody who's ever, succeeded somebody in any way, shape, or form knows that there's challenges in that. But it didn't take long before, man, we saw a whole lot of really dynamic growth happening in our student ministry around here. I mean, I vividly remember I was doing children's ministry here at the time, and, the buses rolling up to take 500 kids to CIY, and it was like, wow, there's something really dynamic happening. Yeah. We had students who were sitting in the service. We were one church in one location with a few services at the time, sitting together in services that would change the way the room felt, on a Sunday morning. It was just a really dynamic thing. So did you, when you guys moved here, did you feel immediately like confirmed in that decision, or did you kind of have a season of going, man, what have we done, or how did that look?
It was a mess a little bit. Not a lot of organization, not a lot of clarity of expectations for volunteers. We spent a lot of time training. We had to cut out a lot of things, made some unpopular decisions.
Yeah, we simplified quite a bit,
to train and invest so that way we could prepare for more. And so it took a minute, and it took, following him is not easy, man. Yeah. I mean, he really is loved, and he's unbelievable. And we're very different. And compared to him, I look really green, even though you're kind of in your senior year. It feels like when you're 29 years old. Yeah. Student ministry for a lot of guys. I mean, bless the men who do it for longer.
Right. Not many people hit 40 doing student ministries. Yeah.
And so that took some time. I didn't do that well at times. Sometimes I kind of went, hey, just shut up and get in the car. We're going somewhere.
Dragging people. Yeah.
And so learning some of that. But yeah, it was this church and its investment. We worked on the budget. We tried to capture some bigger vision for what that could look like. We moved, did some facility stuff that changed it. And it was a blessing. 7 years of being here was a blessing. And my role changed a little bit too in the midst of all of that, and so battled infertility in the midst of it. My wife had cancer. My brother was killed. I became, just again, one campus. If you stick around here long enough, sometimes your role changes, and it's not always the case. And just because you don't change, it doesn't mean you're not doing a good job. But the reality is, it went from high school and middle school, and then college, post-college. And then when John stepped in, it was 0 to age 30.
Yep.
management team. There was a strategy team of 6 of us for a short spell, and I taught some on the weekend in 608. And owner of everything, owner of nothing toward the end, and even that season of you and I getting to do some of that stuff together was really, really fun. But it was definitely not an easy season for me to try to figure out. When you become owner of everything, owner of nothing, and trying to figure out how to step back and support, and we had some transition on that whole team and stuff. But I enjoyed the leadership stuff. It just felt weird not to teach consistently, and so I just kept going. What does that look like? And it felt like God was kind of unraveling us a little bit of our calling to be here. But what did that look like? And so we spent some time and kind of wrestled through that. And so that moved us to church planting.
Yeah. So right around 2005-ish, 2004-ish, where I transitioned into high school ministry.
Yeah.
You're in that age level director position. I stepped into that role going, oh man, this is it. This is like me for the next 15 years. That was my legitimate thought. I was 24 years old, thought 15 years, man, this is dream position, and, but what was interesting was by the time you all left to go plant a church, I had already moved to Colorado. So I by like a couple weeks, but you and I ended up leaving basically right around the same time. And so it's one thing to make a move from Louisville to Lexington. And in some sense, it's like, man, when you're leaving your family, it doesn't matter if you're an hour and a half away or, an hour and a half plane flight away or whatever it is. You're just away. It's not like you can go down the street and go see your friend. But there's something pretty substantial about picking up your family and going new place all the way across the country. I land out in Colorado. You land out in Seattle, So 2006-ish, 2005, you guys start to consider, should we get into church planting? So walk us through a little bit of that process and what made you land in Seattle.
Again, not that this is for every listener today, but when you're in Bible college or you're in ministry and you've got a little bit of a leadership gift, you go, plant a church would be awesome because you think, man,
I'm the
boss. Do what I want. I don't need all this red tape, these meetings. And the reality is, but it falls on you,
right?
And you also got to raise the support. You also got to build the team, and so some friends were wrestling through that, and I was listening, interested. There was a guy that wanted to do it with me, and we ended up not doing it together. I broke up with him, and he's doing great work, and it was the right thing. But it was a ride. And to be honest with you, it's funny because we both are back here, but I don't know if you felt this way, Scott, but when I left here, I thought, I never want to be anywhere else. I want to be, I never want to go to the Midwest. I never want to go to the South. I ended up going back to both. But I feel like my whole life was my gifts, my story, my experiences, my faith, just the place where my faith was and my trust in Him. And so we wrestle through this and go through a church planting assessment. It's kind of like boot camp, and they get a feel for who we are. They have all kinds of different people in it, church planters, Christian counselors, different leaders to go, hey, do you have what it takes? I mean, even my first question was, so what are you looking for in a church planter? Like, what's some of your key characteristics? Maybe what's your number one? And they said pain. And I went,
pain tolerance.
Pain. And so I go,
and you've been through some serious pain at that point.
And so you're going, okay, somebody that's got some bandwidth and some capacity and has history with God and it's not been the first time they've been kicked in the man parts. They can get up and keep moving. And so along the way, we felt a lot of peace about it, but it just, it was pretty scary. And moving out there 2,500 miles away after some significant health issues with my wife was hard. And even in the midst of some of that, when you move that far away from your support system, to borrow the line from some other person that I'll clean up, your junk floats. And so we had to walk through a season, a little bit of that as we got ready.
Well, you didn't move to the shiniest, happiest place in the world either. No. Seattle's known not just for it being rainy and gloomy, which there's substantial reality to that. The seasonal affective thing is a real thing out there. And, I moved to a place where there were 300 days of sunshine a year,
Buddy. And your area's tough, hard ground too.
Yeah, it was a very dark place, and even with that, the winters were 300 days of sunshine for about 4 hours. While you're at work, and then in March you get 3 feet of snow.
Yeah.
So and those are two very pagan cultures. I mean, and when I say pagan, I mean pagan.
Yeah.
I mean they're the witchcraft, everything that you can imagine is popular except for Christianity, families and children, and Jesus.
Yeah.
So you go to this dark place, but with this strong calling, and you're feeling very confirmed and convicted in that, and then to your point, you get kicked in the nuts a few times, while you're out there, but you also see growth and life change, and all that. Your mentality of, man, this is where I'm putting down roots. That was our mentality as well.
Yeah.
We were in Colorado for 11 years, and we never dreamed we would be back here. Not because of resentment of back here or anything like that. Just going, no, God called us out here, and it felt.
Thank God for that season. But this is what.
And it felt like, to your point, like all my life has been kind of directed towards this place and this moment for this time, and so talk about, it's one thing to join a church. It's another thing to be on a staff. You've already hit on this a little bit, but it's a whole other thing to go, I'm going to start a church. I'm going to be a church planter. Unique challenges. And then how did that complicate it, or did it complicate it when it came time to let it go?
Yep. It's like starting a business, I guess. This lands on you. You and I had been in positions prior to this where we didn't worry about the offering.
No.
Those numbers, those budgets, those things didn't land on us. And but we end up in places where we have significant responsibility.
And you're hiring people, moving them across the country to be a part of this, and families are.
Yes. A lot of lessons that we learned in the midst of that. God's provision for us. I mean, I remember before I even started to raise money, I mean, there's a family that you and I both know that they heard about what we were doing. And I remember being in the car, and I was driving. I was still working at Southland, and I got a call from this man, and he said, "Hey, I just want you to know that we are so sad that you're leaving, but we love you, and we want to be one of the first to support you with a check for $10,000. And I'd never raised more than probably $2,000 for a Haiti trip or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you say that again?"
Right.
And I was blown away at God's provision, you know. And so $550,000 over the next 5 years. We had some staff transition along the way. We had a church planting organization and a mother church that overpromised, underdelivered. A mother church that wasn't ready to support us. So we became a parachute plant, which is not the best way. It's hard, man. And so you hustled, and there was grit. There was crazy spiritual warfare on our team with my wife and our family. And we got that thing up and running in 2007. And a lot of blessing and a lot of joy. I mean, just very few people that knew anything about this, but they just had connected with us at some place or some event, or they'd seen me somewhere, or they connected with my wife, and just watching people do ministry that just are still wet from their baptism. You know, it's like there's a lady running the children's area, and they're like, "Hey, this whole thing with Jonah and the whale."
Yeah.
Like,
study up this week.
Is that literal?
You're teaching it next week.
Is that a real whale?
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, I mean, I just think about the early church. And
man.
You know, going, wow. You know, so it was a blessing in 2012, maybe 11. Market collapsed. Housing market. 26% of our people lost their jobs.
Wow.
We were exhausted. I had not taken good care of me, and just going, hey, what does God have for us? Still portable. We you know, no one knew about the tithe. I mean, you know,
sure,
like, what does that mean? Tithe?
Yeah.
What is that? And so we're trying to explain that in the midst of the culture, fear-based. People went from luxury and having a third-car garage with lots of stuff in it to hoarding, saving, scarcity because of what might happen. And so we just continue to watch this and going, hey, I got to make up some hard calls or hard pitches to our church. And there's only so much people can do. When you make honest, you know, communication with stuff like that, people jump in. And I mean, there's some crazy stories of single lady who fell in love with Jesus, and she double tithed, and she is it's unbelievable. But then there are people that go, oh gosh, it's just easier for me to go to this other church versus being here. And so we had to really take some time to ask God for clarity. The organization was saying, what are you worried about? What are you worried about? And it's like,
you're not boots on the ground with me over here.
yeah, and never in the trenches, ever.
Sure.
And so we had to process through that, spend a lot of time prayer and fasting in places. I had to seek some wisdom of people. I had to listen to what it was that God was saying. And eventually he said, we're releasing you. And I wanted something, I wanted to kind of resonate into a couple of other churches that we had partnered with along the way and help them, and the organization did not want to. And so it still exists. It's still there. And it's different leadership than what it was before. And it's, I had to relinquish, but there were so many times along the way where God was going, hey, are you building this or me?
Right.
And so that's been the nature. And that, for a guy who never really worried ever in his life, once he became a Christian, it was a battle. And
I mean, for any man, it's a challenge not to get your identity all wrapped up in what you do.
Yep.
Whether you're a baker, a candlestick maker, however the phrase goes, in ministry, it's very challenging.
Yeah.
And then I can only imagine.
And so far, I've been a good steward of
Yeah.
what happened at Northeast and what happened at Southland.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I can only imagine how much more difficult it is to fight that battle of not allowing your identity to get tied up in being a church planter. I mean, a church that you came up with the name. I mean, you went out there, you planted it. I mean, this is it's not your baby, but it can easily feel that way. It's his baby, just like our kids, but you still love those kids.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, what was what were the emotions you were dealing with? Did you feel like a quitter? I don't want to.
Hey,
what in the world?
We just had a picture of Jeff Shepard come off the wall back there.
Jeff Shepard.
Yeah.
Well, what everybody doesn't know is that the guys here had to do a reset from a women's podcast to a men's podcast, so they rehung the pictures. So that's the way men hang pictures right there.
Yeah.
Good job, guys. Jeff Shepard. I'll apologize to him.
Is that Martha Stewart up there? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, what did you feel like? I mean, what were the negatives? What were the positives? How was God faithful? Take it whatever direction you want.
I was one of the questions that I went to a church that they support church planters, and they gave a lot of money to us. But they said, what's your biggest fear? Failure.
Right.
Failure. I mean, not being able to get this thing off the ground. And going, man, I mean, we're so close, and then all these other circumstances around us. But yet also paying attention to my ministry wheels going, hey, is this where we need to be? And sometimes you go through some turnover and you think that it won't happen to you, but there's scaffolding that happens. People come to help you start it, and you hope that it'll be different, but sometimes they leave, and that's just part of the seasons that people have for whatever reason. And so I had to wrestle through that. I had a phone call from a guy that I had a network of guys that were church planters or they were lead pastors, and so a guy called me up out of the blue and said, hey, listen, after he'd heard that we resigned, he said, I need you to know something. This guy, his church is twice as big as yours. My church is twice as big as his, and this guy's church is twice as big as mine. And this guy that has the church is twice as big as yours is not twice as gifted as you are. And I'm not twice as gifted as him, and he's not twice as gifted as me. Your calling is to obedience.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of things, Scott, I mean, the reality is it's hard, and we had to move our family, and you lose money in a market that collapses when you buy in Seattle, on and on. But there are missionaries, man, that go to places that would trade my scenario, in
your
a heartbeat,
problems,
and they've worked hard in difficult, hard soiled places, and they've seen no fruit or very little fruit, and so some of that is Matthew 25, where it talks about just the parable of the talents, but some of it is, man, there's so many people that are called to go do stuff that's just really hard. And they don't see stuff. I mean, look at all the prophets. I mean, look at the kings. I mean, there are places where these guys are just trying to be faithful or just trying to be a mouthpiece, and they get hit in the mouth, or it doesn't go well for them, or they lose their lives. And they all lost their lives. I mean, really, the apostles did. And so why would it be different? You know? But it's easy to kind of look around and go, oh, gosh, how did they do that? Or
Sure.
this person over here. It's like and you start kind of digging. It's like, no, man, this is my race.
Yeah.
This is a race that God's marked out for me. And it's it's all over the place, man. And so even in talking about this, there's a little bit of me that goes, it's a little overwhelming because I have an angle about specific. We all have a general calling. All of us do. Not just us that work at this church
Right.
or Christians that work in churches or any of that, but all of us. God's called all of us to this calling. And that general calling is to love Him, love others, is to be light, is to forgive our neighbor, is to serve those who, on and on and on. But there's a specific calling that God created us to have in Ephesians 2 and all of those things. But it's going, what is that for me? The person who may be listening to this goes, I don't work.
Yeah.
I don't work at a church. I mean, I just got done having lunch with a guy that's really wrestling through vocationally what
Yes.
it is that God's asked me to do.
Yeah.
You've had people all the time that knock on the door and go, "Hey, man, I need your ear. Help me understand. What do you think? Where's God in the midst of all this? What's my posture in all this? How do I navigate?"
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to move us away from that.
No, and I think one of the points of application for men is considering your family, and that's where, especially ministry, can get really dicey. And I've seen a lot of people sacrifice their family on the altar of ministry, and so watching you consider your family and what,
and you're in the identity piece. I don't know that I really answered that. I got to go back to who I am,
Right?
Who's God made me? Because
Right.
is it Scott Hatfield? And this is what's on the back side of my baseball card at Northeast.
Yeah.
This is what's on the back of my baseball card at Southland. And now, man, this is a rough
Rough
that
year,
type of.
yeah.
And so, but go no. Has He called me? Did He call me there?
And
Is He
that's,
releasing
I
me?
mean, that's a good metaphor. You always use metaphors,
I know.
but that's
Yeah.
twice in 2 days you've used a baseball card one, so I'm keeping track. But that's a really good one because that's the way we think. It's like, what's
is.
my batting average? How many
Yep.
home runs did I hit? How many strikeouts did I have?
Yep.
And then the cumulative effect of all those years, And so, you start to look at it and go, man, was I in a slump for the last 3
Sure.
years, or what was that?
Yeah.
You and I stayed in contact throughout the entirety of your time in Seattle while I was out in Colorado. It's fuzzy for me on. So you guys came back to Kentucky,
Yeah, good.
and then you landed in Danville at Southland, right, doing youth ministry again.
So if you really want to know, on the back of that baseball card, I came back knowing that I was coming back. We had 2 babies, or 1 baby and one almost here, 6.5 months apart, and not having a place to go, not knowing where I was going, but knowing that I wanted to do ministry, but knowing we needed to lock it down, and we had been so far from home, and knowing that part of our family calling again is that we do better when there's support. And we looked at the bros, and you go, why did but that's it's like, well, there's some blessing in that if it's solid and it's good. And so we came back. I did construction for a year, and then Southland called and said, "Hey, there's a situation in Danville," and I stepped into a youth pastor role, and wanted to bring some healing and process people and reestablish trust. And so I did that for 2 years.
And you kind of
interim-wise.
I forgot that you did the construction piece then as well.
Yeah.
And you knew when you stepped into the Danville role that was kind of an interim.
I asked
piece,
for it to be that.
and you asked for it to be that.
Yep.
And the interesting, again, our roads, have kind of done this so many times over all these years. Which I still remember the first time I met you. You don't remember the first time you met me, but that's okay. Do you remember?
You mentioned this before.
No, it was at
Cincinnati.
CBC. Yeah, it was.
I didn't mean
you
it.
gave me the eyebrow. I
did?
Yeah, you kind of cold shouldered me. It was all right. You were there to see Travis Fox. It was fine. I'm not bitter, but but our roads have intersected many times. And so I had this conference that I did in Denver before Christmas or after Christmas every year.
Yeah.
And I spoke at it, and then I got this kind of strange, call where somebody said,
I am upset at you about this.
I know. So
be careful what we say.
Yeah, I know. I'll try to be careful. You tell me if we need to edit it out. But I had somebody call me, about a position, which was, that would happen every now and then.
Lead pastor role, yeah.
And about this church in Kansas City, and their lead pastor had died, and his son had been at the conference that I spoke at. Yeah. And he went back and told his mom, I found the guy who needs to replace Dad, which was kind of a you can't just
Brewster-esque a
you
little
can't
bit.
just put that on me in a phone call. And at that point in my time,
Yeah,
I mean, I was
you're in a good spot.
100% like, no, man, I'd said no to other things, and
Yep.
we were very confident where we were and very at home and all that. And so, people may think we over spiritualize
Right.
things like this, but there are times in ministry where you just kind of reach and you just go, well, who do I know that's looking,
Yeah.
and I go,
Right.
well, this guy's Scott Hatfield,
Yep.
which
Yep.
if I'm being super honest, there was a part of me that was like, I'm just trying to get this
Yeah.
person off the phone. And I know Hatfield's, and I didn't think
Right.
in a million years, that it would necessarily pan out. But
Yeah.
I think I texted you and said, hey man, I just threw your name to somebody or called you.
And
Next
we
thing I
interviewed
know,
a lot of places.
Yeah.
I mean, California, Virginia, Cincinnati, Owensboro, Nashville. I mean, there was a lot of places we were trying to figure out. So honestly, I mean, it was. I appreciated you looking out for me. We stayed in touch with each other, but yes, and so that came, and then we were on the phone with him for about 6 months.
yeah. And it was,
5.5
I don't
months.
think I'd heard from you really in the interim until
Yeah.
you reached out to me like, hey man, we're going to Kansas City. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you can go as far down that road as you want to, or
Yeah.
not down that road at all. But so you go out to Kansas City. That's what year is that approximately? 13?
14.
14?
13 or 14.
And
Yeah.
to be a lead pastor.
Yep.
You'd already
Yep.
been a lead pastor at Resonate,
Yep.
so this is not unfamiliar necessarily. So
Correct.
you're going not as far as Seattle, but you're going
Yeah. That's right.
out I-70.
7-8 hours away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I tried to be really clear with them about who I am, that I do this in team. There were lots of factors that were interesting, challenging, to the point where there are times where we just kind of walk away. The guy that was in the process that was really spearheading that process, man, I really liked him. And he was teachable, he was coachable, he really saw, and there were certain things about them that they didn't really know who they were.
Yeah.
They were very organic how they started, and some of the people were amazing. Some of the people I just couldn't get a beat on, and so finally, like at the end, we just said, "Hey, look, there's 7 things that." They were trustees, not elders at the time.
Yeah.
But there's 7 things that we're going to ask you to do, and they all
you're
have
like
to-
John Maxwell. You always
to
have
be asked.
numbers of things. You 6 this, 7 that.
I was trying to cover the ground
21 this.
because I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that we weren't going to be in a bad place.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
people sometimes say things in interview processes that they don't really mean.
You picked up on that too, huh?
Yeah, how about that? So they all said yes. All 7 of them said yes to all 7 things, and we were there for almost 3 years, and none of those things ever happened. The church doubled in size. We saw more decisions for Christ in those 2 years than they'd seen in the previous 11, and I could do no right. And so, I'm going, oh my gosh, man, what is there? And there's a growing contingent of people that love me, but there was a group of people that
It wouldn't have mattered what you did.
it didn't matter what I did.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ Himself could have come in. And
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been enough. And I don't disparage those people. I get it's kind of like when your parents get divorced and you think you've grieved until your parent gets remarried, and then you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And so, and he did it a certain way.
Yeah.
He was very involved in every little thing, and
It's one thing to follow somebody. It's another thing to follow someone who's died.
yeah,
You know.
And I'd followed Brewster, I'd
Right.
followed Ron Castens,
Right.
and to follow a guy that had passed away, and really cancer had redeemed a lot of the things that had happened in his relationship with his family and his wife. He was a big fish, small pond. Went everywhere, did everything. There was some interesting expectations that were placed on me. And I just kept going, it's not about me, man. Let's create the right structure of care and support. Let's make sure that we've got people discipled. I want to go fight for people who have yet to come through the door, and I want to do leadership development. And let me preach well, and let us see what God's going to do. And so that's where we went. And there just were times along the way it just felt like it didn't matter what I did. We had 22 baptisms, 22 or 23 one weekend in a service, and I'm like coming into a trustees meeting going, "This is gonna be great, man! Finally, we're trying to turn the corner, trying to get them to dance with me." And they were like, "Yeah, who's going to disciple these people?" Like,
Wow. Talk about trying to find a glass half full when it's over the brim. Dang. Well, so do you feel like you were quicker to pull the trigger with that because of your experience in Seattle, or was it unrelated?
I think I watched my world began to open up to go, hey, this isn't just about you, Hatfield. Not that it was about me, but a lot of the decisions we made along the way has been as a result of our gifts. And don't let me speak for you, but God's given you some gifts, man. And so that's why he sent you to Colorado, and that's why he sent you back here. He's done the same thing for me. And so I'm watching a church, some people in Kansas City, my daughter who's just now in high school or 8th and 9th grade going, hey, Dad, what do they talk bad about you?
Yeah.
And it's not like thousands of people. This is 500 people.
Right.
And I mean, she never not hears it. And there was a lot of immaturity and spiritual arrogance inside of that organization. And I'm going, really, for me, it came down to, it's going to end up being one of three things. We're going to split this church. I'm going to ask some people to resign. We're going to it's going to be bloody.
Yeah.
And is that what I want my oldest daughter to remember about the church, and what might the enemy do in respect to what does it look like, and what about Jesus, in all the midst of this? Or do I just shut my mouth and play survivor, outwit, outlast, outplay, and hope and pray that it eventually there's just favor?
Yeah.
And I'm not good at that. I'm not saying I can't get better at it. I'm not great at it.
And
I'm
not my forte
I'm just
either.
taking shots, man. And then thirdly, leave graciously and trust that God's going to take care of me, and maybe this church would do. And they did.
Well, and it's super interesting that those are your filters because, again, our paths. So driving across the country from Colorado to come to Lexington, but my family were getting ready to make a little short detour down to Nashville, and we stop in Kansas City to have dinner with you guys and watch
the
UK
game.
play.
Yeah.
And you were, I didn't realize, getting ready to announce, I think the next day or a couple days later, it might have been a Friday, but you were going to announce that it was your last Sunday at that church that very weekend.
Yeah.
And so we were talking to you guys about that, and I pulled you aside at one point to say, hey, man, I'm getting ready to drive down to Nashville to interview. And you kind of looked at me like, what? And so in our story, it kind of felt like a tipping point, but it wasn't really a tipping point. It was a long time coming where we arrived at a similar place where I looked at Allie and basically just said, how about I just tough this out?
Yeah.
That way, you guys get to keep your home. You get to keep, your friends, everything that we've made home. And
sounds like what a man does,
nothing
right?
changes for everybody else. I'll just take it, you know.
Yeah.
And Allie looked at me, going, well, it doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, when your wife puts things you've taught and said right back in your face,
She's
I know that.
a smart lady.
So, our filters became very similar in that it was stay, and it could become a fight. It could become bloody. Stay and just be passive and let my heart die on the vine, which was kind of what I was saying. Now let me just do that one.
Sure.
Let me just stay and just grin and bear it.
Yeah, it's noble,
all right.
but you're still dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the idea that won't have fallout on my family is what, the other thing Allie was pointing to.
Yeah.
And then the third was maybe this is the time that you need to actually listen when people call. And so Loving This Church in Nashville had called, a good friend had been involved in that process. And now in looking back, I'm able to go, man, there was a million things that were really dysfunctional about that process and were misrepresented. And again, when you're in the church world, even when you've been in it for a long time, there's kind of this high trust that you tend to have where you just go, okay, I'm going to trust what they're telling me. And so, we walked through this, what we thought would be a very short process that we had hoped would be done prior to Easter of that year, which was 2017, ended up taking until my wife's birthday, which is in May, which doesn't sound long in retrospect, but listen, when your whole world's hanging in the balance.
Kids got school stuff,
sports,
friends.
Every moment is pretty excruciating. Every day is real painful, and you start to almost feel like a middle school girl where you're like, waiting for emails and text messages and trying to figure out where you're at in the process.
Your brain doesn't stop. You're trying to figure it out.
You can't turn it off, because the implications of this are massive, not just in your own world, but for a lot of people. And so, we end up going through this process with this church in Nashville. And then there were 2 or 3 places along the way where I should have probably called the ball and going, we're done. We're not in this process anymore. But I'm really stubborn. And I've been able to trace in my life where there's been times where I have just bowed out so that I wouldn't experience failure. And so I was pretty resolute, and I think I actually overcorrected.
Yeah.
I think
I've done that too.
I was really resolute and going, "Oh no, I'm not bowing out. You're going to tell me I'm not your guy,
Yeah.
and make you look me in the eye, or tell me I'm your guy.
Yeah.
But you're going to tell me I'm not bowing out and then claiming that I stepped away. No. You're going to knock me out, or And they said you're not our guy, And for a guy who likes to win, for a guy who likes to be first pick, that was a tough pill. Honestly, it's really weird. Like
we haven't talked a whole lot about it. I mean, I knew that it happened. I was like, dude, you got to be kidding me.
Well, and that was part of it. Like I had all these folks who were just like, this is all roads were leading towards this is going to happen. And it felt like it was going to happen, and then it didn't.
Yeah.
And my wife was more wrecked in the moment by that than I was. I was kind of more at peace, kind of like, oh, okay, maybe we just get to stay here, who knows. But at that point, once your heart gets so far down the road, it is hard to get it back, and God in some really incredible ways initiated a conversation back here at Southland, which again, I would have never dreamed. And so that year of 2017, that process ended with that church in Nashville in May. We were living here by Labor Day,
Wow.
So, and we would have never dreamed it if you would have said it the day before my wife's birthday, that the way this summer will end will be with you living back home in Lexington, Kentucky, know. And it's just a wild, set of circumstances. And we ended up back here. You guys were back here. You were doing construction again.
Yeah, man.
And, we ended up over, I don't know, was it a year before we got you on staff doing care ministry?
Yeah, I came back and there was some conversation around. I'd interviewed a church in Louisville and it just wasn't the right fit. And so we felt like God was telling us to come back to Kentucky. And so that's what we knew. And just Lexington's been home since, most of our adult lives, and even though we've been in different places. But so we came here, and there were some possibilities, but it didn't open up. And so I did construction for a year and thought, well, it'll either open up here, or we'll put it back in the truck and go somewhere else. And so then a care position opened. And I think there was a little bit of I remember even in the interview process, Kurt, and I not calling him out, but Kurt just said, hey. It was for care, and he said, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And what he's trying to figure out is, are you going to...
Will you stick it out with us?
Yeah.
Who could know?
Right? Yeah, and I just said, hey, Kurt, I'm going to be honest, I'm over trying to figure out my life.
Right.
And I think for me, finally, there are seasons to calling. And, the guy that says, God called me here and I'm going to be here to the end of my... Listen, if that's the case, if he's really truly told you that, God bless you. But he's never told me that. And I sometimes feel like a rhino running 30 miles an hour, can see 30 feet in front of him. And I'm just trying to be as diligent as I can and the best steward that I can. But I can't promise that. I mean, I love this place. And you know what? If that's where God wants me, man, let me serve faithfully without a comfort bone in my body to continue to pursue what it is that God wants us to do here, and that way for you. But I don't have a clue.
One of the challenges I think is because we've had a very similar approach, and I think it's wise to circle this all the way back to Randy Beard going longevity.
Yeah.
So put down roots, like that's where they're going to bury you, and then if they don't, then that's God's deal, not yours.
That's right.
And that opens yourself up to a whole level of pain, which goes back to what the church planning organization asked you, what's your pain tolerance?
Yeah.
Ministry requires that, but being a father, husband, a leader, that's part of the job description. And I've been very similar in regards to, man, I don't have 5-year plans. I don't have 10-year plans. I try to just do what God tells me to do. I have hopes and dreams. I have thoughts. I'm not sitting there and pretending like I don't have some plans in my mind, but it is the Lord that orders our steps, so that's a freeing way to live. It really, really is. And there's this dance of once you've ripped that Band-Aid off a couple times, can it become, and I've seen guys in not just ministry, but in a lot of places just be willing to just constantly and consistently, just they're always looking to the next thing, and they're again they put their family on the altar of that. And I think there's a real balance of going, put down roots, like you're going to be there forever, open yourself up to the possibility of extraordinary amounts of pain if you ever have to leave, but you also open yourself up to the benefit of having those deep roots in relationships and commitment to calling where you are. And I think that's the best place to be.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, my role, I did care for a year and a half here, and I loved it. And I was able to be a great resource to you and John. I was able to start Fight Club. I was able to connect with people. I love that stuff. I love being in the trenches with people. And then in January 2020, I stepped into this different role. And I would have never, again, there's just so many things. Never say never. I mean, when you leave, never say that you'd never, you know, I would never have thought I'd play at an executive role. I'd just go, ugh, you know. But the idea of going, man, how can we really shape a culture and develop our leaders and our staff and navigate some of the gospel narratives that God's asking us to do here? It's a fun thing to get to do this in teams with you and Vandy, with all of our lead team, and with my side of the equation of our org chart. It's been a joy. I mean, we were just talking a little bit about this yesterday. I had a staff meeting, and it's fun to see what God's been doing internally in our culture, in our staff. And it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just drift toward good. You got to cultivate it. And,
That's right.
And there's been a lot of effort, a lot of people along the way, and a lot of consistency and challenging and raising bar of expectation, trying to really build and rebuild trust and things like that. But it's been good, man. So yeah, I you know, this whole calling thing it's a mystery. I mean, you know,
It really is.
I mean, my calling has been very different than yours, but yeah, we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
But then there's some people, man, they you know, Cindy Wilson's been here for 35 years. This will probably be it. There are other people that, you know, they've been all over. There are people that leave their job in the world, and they go and they become missionaries. It's only the economy of God, the mystery of God, that He does that in people. And for us, our job is to really make sure that we're in tune and abiding, so that way we can hear His voice, because He really does have good things that He wants to do in our lives that He's already planned for us. It's just going, what does that look like? And being available to hear those things, whatever that is. And it's not callings just for people like us who work at our church. It's for all of us, and I think that's super important.
Well, I'll land us here. This will probably end up being a couple episodes when we cut this up. But, you know, I was sitting on vacation a couple years back on the beach, and I think it was the last day. And I always get out there early, put up, you know, the tent and the chairs and everything, so I can stake out my territory. And, you know, honestly, when I'm on vacation, I just want to sit, read a book, and get in the ocean and take naps on the beach. That's all I do. Not super interested in having conversations with people, you know, that kind of thing. And so this guy comes up to me, and he starts chatting with me about the tent that I've got and where'd I get it and all that kind of thing. This is the last thing I want to do. Yeah, it's not liking it at all. He walks away, and then he comes back, asks me a couple more questions, and then he just kind of looks at me. And about that time, I go, I know this guy. This guy's familiar to me.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and goes, hey, man, are you Scott Nickel? And I go, yeah. And then it immediately hit me, and I said the name of the church. It was the executive pastor from the church in Nashville. So we hadn't seen each other since that process. You know, this is years later, down the road. And it actually ended up being this really cool conversation where we were able to kind of sit and rehash and just go, man, God's been so faithful. He's been so good, and I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful that process didn't work out the way I wanted it to. Even as jacked up as it was, and as angry as I was at you guys, I'm so thankful that you got who you needed to get, and I ended up where I needed to be. But we don't always get the benefit of those. But boy, it's nice when God gives that to you.
Gives you the river,
and it really did. It felt like a real just moment of God's grace to go, let me just at the end of your vacation remind you you're exactly where I want you to be.
That's good.
So it's a good place to be. And man, thanks for being on the podcast again.
It was awesome.
So, all right,
awesome.
Hey guys, share this podcast with those you love, and we'll catch you next time on Locker Room. Peace.